Hey everyone, it's Matt here and welcome to our tutorial level channel. And in this video, we're going to do something a little bit different because normally I would talk about modding the 3DS and how to do it. But in this video, we're just going to talk about some of the pros and cons. So if you're looking for a how to do it video, something like that, I would highly suggest actually going to this link and reading it out. Now, if you are more of a visual learner, then if you are going to go on YouTube and look up tutorials, I would highly suggest making sure that the upload date is from whatever time you're watching this video is as close to when you are watching a video like this as possible, because there are outdated guides, video guides, because the guide does change over time. Recently, the guide for 3DS modding did change because Nintendo removed eShop functionality. So I would highly suggest, if you are like me and you're more of a visual learner and you want to see videos, I would suggest having the actual text guide up right next to you while looking at a video that came out as close to you watching videos as possible. I am stressing this. I said it twice because I am stressing this, because you can very easily, if you are not following the guide right, brick your 3DS. And I know the memes going on online about how easy it is to mod your 3DS, because it is. But it won't be if you're using the wrong guide and you mess something up. So again, highly suggest looking into that. We'll be posting some links down below in the description box if you're interested. I'm just talking about the pros and cons when it comes to modding the 3DS in this video. So when it comes to cons, there are none. So take care. Only pros. Nice to see y'all. Like and subscribe. Okay, so I'm kidding. There are some cons, and we will be talking about them throughout the video. But let's talk about, we'll have a good mix of pros and cons. So some of the pros, by the way, if you're looking at this, before we even get to pros, you can see that this is the 3DS LL, not XL. Remember that if you want a 3DS XL to mod, because it has a bunch of stuff that we'll get to in just a bit when talking about it. But no, this is the Japanese 3DS LL, so it is bigger than a normal 3DS, of course. I mean, look at this bad boy. But it is not the new 3DS XL and the new 2DS XL. It's not that. This is a plain old 3DS technically, which, by the way, here's a pro of modding your 3DS just right off the bat. You can do it with Japanese ones, and you can also play US games when doing so, not through the actual game slot. Sadly, you will have to do some other kind of program that personally it has a chance of bricking your system if you try to change the region. So I personally don't do that. I actually have it as a Japanese region still. But when it comes to CIA files, which are the files that you can actually install on your 3DS that you should be ripping yourself, everyone. You should be ripping those from a US modded 3DS, I guess. But you should be doing that. Your games that you purchased, that you've ripped. But point is that when it comes to those games, even if they're US games, they can be played on this system. Now, you do have to change the region on the file itself, but it can easily be done with a file that you can put on your 3DS, your modded 3DS, of course, easily. So that is a lot easier, in my opinion, than actually changing the region and potentially having issues. So I actually have not touched the region whatsoever on this thing when it comes to game cards. But when it comes to the files themselves, yeah, change that region, baby. Now, that is the first pro that we have here. But a con that now is not so much of a con anymore is that you cannot use the 3DS eShop. So, oh well, it was a con for a while, I would argue. I would also suggest not going online with it. Again, not so much a con anymore with Nintendo servers, not really going to be, kept up for the 3DS. But still something that you should be thinking about, whether or not you want to mod your 3DS while the store is still up to a certain capacity and servers are still up to a certain extent. So I would suggest maybe not doing it to your main 3DS, and understanding that you're not just going to be able to re-download your games or anything like that. I'm sure there's workarounds and people have tried to do workarounds, but I'm a bit more old school in that mentality. I'm from the age of, oh, it's modded, we're not going online. Just, it's done. And you'll see sometimes people will say, no, you can go online with this app or that app, but there's you're 70% good to go. And I'm like, that's nowhere near 100. Not doing it. So there are ways to actually get around it, but from what I've noticed, just don't do that. Like, just, you know, have that be your other 3DS. This is the 3DS that you're going to put your backups on, that you have legally backed up, or some fan translations on, which is another pro as well. There are fan translations for the 3DS, and if you look up that they are compatible with modded 3DSs, guess what? You can play games that you never had the chance to play in the US on your 3DS, and it is amazing. And I've actually talked about a few games. I do have a series on our Those Guys Play channel where I talk about 5 games from different consoles that you can actually play that are English translated, you know, games that we never had the chance to play here in the US. And yes, I'm plugging that right now because the 3DS video was the first one that I ever did, and because it astounded me that we were actually at the point where even 3DS videos, 3DS games were being fan translated. I assumed that was something that was only like NES or SNES, you know, the handhelds like the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color Advance, but no, 3DS does have fan translations, and a pro is that you can definitely play them on your modded 3DS. Also, hacks. If a hack is available to be played, like even though it's been hacked, something hasn't been changed in the code to the point where it shouldn't work on an original 3DS, yes, you can actually play those on your 3DS as well. Now, there are some cons, of course. So one con is, and it's something that people don't usually talk about, but I really do want to talk about, is the fact that just because emulation is available for the 3DS, so for instance, you can play Game Boy Color games on your 3DS, because of course you can, because you can buy Game Boy Color games from the eShop. But that doesn't mean that every single Game Boy Color game is 100% compatible. Doesn't mean it for any of them. By the way, this being another con, before we get to that, just another quick con, because this isn't a new Nintendo 3DS, means that you cannot play SNES games or new Nintendo 3DS games on it. There are no ways, from what I can tell, to downscale, or I don't know if downscale is the right word, but to downport, there we go, that's the word, new 3DS games onto this 3DS. So you are locked out from the plethora of games. There weren't a lot, but there still were some fun ones that you cannot use on a 3DS. When it comes to SNES games, I'm sure someone in the comments was like, wait a minute, hold on, you can emulate SNES games on this DS. And you can, but it's not really. There are a bunch of issues when trying to do so, and again, even when it comes to emulating or trying to quote-unquote inject games, which I'll talk about what that means in a second, when it comes to those, again, it is nowhere near 100% compatible, so you should definitely go online and consult some lists. If you don't want to do that and just stick to whatever games are available on the eShop, I would suggest buying a few, okay? Support, you know, the companies, let them know that you might want that on the Switch or something like that. I really do, you know, this isn't me trying to promote piracy or anything like that, and hey, stop it, take off the laugh track. Alright, I don't know why people are laughing when I said that. I mean it. This is not to try to endorse piracy. This is just looking at some games that are way out of my price range that I will probably never be able to purchase from franchises that I wasn't playing back when they were officially released on the 3DS, that you should buy digitally right now, I would argue. But when you're talking about from a long-term perspective, especially with the store not existing anymore, that's why I am much, more confident in talking about this. Just like I did a Wii U video a little bit ago on this channel and also on our Those Guys Play channel, because talking about modding for those two systems, they are nowhere near the modern system anymore. That's the Switch. That's something you won't really hear me talking about on this channel until that's going the way of the dodo and we're moving on to the next generation of console. But when it comes to 3DS, we're at the point where there are some very expensive games when you end up having some games that we're never going to be able to play again, or like I said, fan translations that we just can't play now, that I feel more comfortable talking about this, but it's not endorsing piracy. It's not. But yes, you can get games that were on the eShop and throw them onto the 3DS as well, just like you could games that have been ripped from your actual cartridges. Which, by the way, if you have a modded 3DS with games from the eShop, like either retro games or things like that, you can rip them yourself. It's not as if just because it is a digital game, it means that it is locked on your console. So you can do that. Also, something cool as well, by the way, is now when you're installing games, you can install them onto an SD card, and you can get an SD card up to any size. Mine is actually, well, not any size, but I believe it's 128 gigabytes. Mine is a modest 64, if I remember correctly. Oh, never mind, actually, mine is a 32 32 because I'm a plebeian. I believe you can go up to 128, although it is ill-advised. 64 gigs, I would argue, is pretty good because remember that you do still have to load these games as you turn the system on. So, you know, you don't want to take that long to actually load everything. You don't want to risk corruption. So I think that 32 gigabytes is enough. 64 probably more preferred if you're, you know, 3DS games can be bigger than you might think, especially if you're going for some RPGs that might be expensive now. Yeah, you know what, they can be bigger files, but I would highly suggest if you're, you know, just trying to go for like more retro stuff, but on a handheld like this with a nice big screen, or even DS games, we'll get to that in Pro in just a bit, I would suggest maybe getting something more on the smaller side, like, you know, 16 gigs or 32 gigs. But let's get to injecting games. We'll get to DS in just a second. So when it comes to quote-unquote injecting games, what you're doing is you're using the built-in emulator that Nintendo put for different consoles, like let's say the NES, the Sega Genesis, and the Game Boy on the 3DS, and you're actually using those to play games that never would have been playable on the 3DS, obviously, because they were, you know, they had to go through different licensing or whatnot, or those also could be fan translations. I do have some Game Boy fan translations on this thing. So you could do that, but remember, you might run into some issues, be they graphical, be they audio. It is not perfect. Just because a company created an emulator for a game for their whatever console it is or handheld does not in any way mean that every game is compatible. That the only issue is that either they couldn't license it or they just didn't want to give it to us. They hate us. Well, no, it's a bit more complicated than that. So you could try, and I have tried, and I've seen some successes and some failures. So definitely look at a compatibility list online if so, or if you just want to try it and it's not on any list, you can try it, but don't be surprised if maybe later on in a level or something the audio messes up or the video, you know, the actual pixels or whatnot mess up. Now, GBA also works as well, which is very interesting because you would think that that would just be a normal emulator. But Pro here, when it comes to the GBA, there were some GBA games released for 3DS, but they were released under the Ambassador program, and they were very limited in scope, and they never really created an official GBA emulator to be put on the eShop. But from what I've been gathering, people did take those games and were able to take that emulator and actually use it for the ability to inject GBA games onto the 3DS. Again, I've also run into some issues there, especially with audio quality, but they do work pretty well. But I can definitely see why Nintendo did not want to do this, you know, per game and put that kind of time into it when they were trying to promote the Wii U at the time, which a lot of things were wrong with the Wii U, I would argue, and right. I did a video on both for our Those Guys Play channel, but I have to say, though, that when it comes to the Wii U, that I do actually enjoy today. Got a little late to the party with it, but I enjoyed today. But you know, wasn't going to save it, GBA games, but I do understand why they were trying. Because GBA, beloved console, I freaking loved it growing up. Makes sense that you would want to play it there, especially on the big screen, record that footage. Although having, you know, a much bigger screen as a handheld doesn't really stretch it out too much for me. So I really enjoyed playing some classics, and even some that I never got the chance to play, and even some fan translations for GBA games on the 3DS as well. So a good Pro, but again, comes with some cons, as always. Nothing is ever truly perfect, sadly. But one thing that I want to talk about, though, when it comes to emulation, as if that wasn't all emulation that we just talked about, but when it comes to emulation in terms of like throwing some emulators on, you can potentially have some more compatibility or just varied compatibility, but I personally am just not super interested in it. And also, when it comes to injecting games, know that you have to, there is a process. It's not just kind of throwing games into an SD card like it would be with emulation. In this case, when it comes to injecting, you do have to have, you know, promotional artwork, put in a name and a year, because if you're looking at these games right now, the console, as far as it knows, they officially can be played via the Game Boy or the GBA emulator or even the NES emulator, Sega Genesis as well. So when it comes to that, there is a bit more time into it. It's a bit more time consuming. I can understand why if you maybe wouldn't want to do that, so I would put that in the con section. It's really cool, it looks nice, but it definitely is more of a con than a pro, and I will fully, you know, I would definitely say that. Also, another con that I would like to mention as well is that it seems as if, and it might be because I got this thing used, but it very much seems as if the battery on this thing is relatively bonked. It's borked, it's scrooped. yeah, it's not really doing too well. And I'm not exactly the biggest fan of that, but I can still get a few hours out of it if I really do try to, charge it to its fullest. But it definitely doesn't go as long as I think it should be going from the 3DSs that I do have that were not modded back in the day, that seemed like they could pretty much hold the charge really well. It seems like this thing isn't. And I tried it before modding it and it seemed like it was fine, but now it definitely seems like it is draining that battery, which does suck. But at the same time though, every other pro I listed, I think it outweighs that con, but it's still something that should be mentioned either way. Now, I talked about DS before. I talked about injecting DS games or throwing DS games onto here. What does that mean? Well, as we all know, there is a DS emulator technically on the 3DS because of the fact that you can just kind of pop in 3DS or DS games and they work. And what's really cool too is that even DS games that aren't from the same region that you're in, whatever 3DS that you have, they still work almost just fine for the most part. There's only a few games that have DSi enhancements that won't work in whatever region that's not the one that the 3DS that you have is. I think prepositions worked well there, I think, maybe. But you get me. So, point is that because you can just kind of pop in a DS game, you can also load DS games onto the SD card and play them with an app called Twilight DS, which is really cool. So, in theory, you can kind of turn this thing into the ultimate beast of a retro console, and modern, quote unquote, as well, with the 3DS games. So really, you can have the best of pretty much any world when it comes to playing games on the 3DS. But again, I've mentioned all the other cons, and it's not as if DS emulation is perfect when doing it through this method either, but I think it's pretty damn good. When you look at some of the games, how they're stretched on the 3DS, not really, a problem with the modding process, but you could maybe not have the best results, and depending on which injected game mod you're using, or rather which injected emulator you're using on this mod of 3DS, you can't really change the aspect ratio, which I'm sure for some of you out there might be a huge issue, but for me, I honestly have zero problem with it whatsoever. And looking at the brightness of the screen and everything like that, I really feel like this is one of the best ways to play some of these retro games. And even just some games that I would never have gotten the chance to play, be it, due to price, be it due to just not even knowing about it as a kid. Now that they're all out of print for the most part, being able to actually play these on this 3DS is fantastic. And you are going to notice a language barrier. You can't really change the language if you've modded it. Well, again, in theory, you can, but I have yet to touch that in fear of potentially messing it up, because I have heard some people say that, like, with messing with the region, changing the language can mess things up. So yes, if your 3DS is in Japanese, it's still going to be in Japanese, but honestly, navigating around is not that hard. It's not like, they made this for children to be able to navigate it, so it's not as if it's that difficult. I can still delete games just fine if I need to, install other games if I need to. So honestly, I am really enjoying this, and I hope you are as well if you do have one. And if you don't, I would highly suggest doing it, because like I said before, the pros definitely outweigh the cons. There's still cons, like I said before, nothing's perfect, but they definitely outweigh them, so I would highly suggest modding your 3DS, as everyone has probably, or most likely at this point. And honestly, with modding 3DS, it's not as if any parts are modded inside it, so if you need to, let's say, replace the battery, or just replace the digitizer or the screen or any of the buttons or anything like that, you can do so, put it all back together, and you still have a modded 3DS. So you broke the warranty anyway, by modding it, but like whatever. So point is that when it comes to the 3DS at this point, because it's all the kinks have been worked out with modding, people have done all they can with it. I'm sure there's even more great, amazing things that are going to be done with it in the future, but as of right now, so much work has been done by the community, and I can't wait to see where it goes in the future. So thank you all so much for watching this video. If you liked the video, please remember to like and subscribe, and if you enjoy your modded 3DS, tell me about it down below in the description box. In the comments. But what will be in the description box, like I mentioned earlier, are some links on how to mod your 3DS. So either way, love y'all, take care, and tune in next time. So see ya.